Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to this L24 special coverage of Ukraine-Russia conflict. 1,000 years ago, Russia and Ukraine shared a legacy that both countries have complicated or shared. According to the Council of Foreign Relations, Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe in the last century, one of the most populous and powerful republics in the former USSR and significant agricultural import. While Russia has watched over its neighbor to the west closely in the past, Ukrainians have experienced periods of protest and government corruption during their independence. Despite Ukraine's ambition to align itself better with Western countries, including its public interest to join in NATO, which was formed at least in the part to data Soviet expansion. In Russia's opinion, one of the main demands is that Ukraine refrains from joining NATO, an alliance between 28 European countries and 2 North American countries that promotes peace and security in the North Atlantic region. As a former Soviet state, the former Soviet Union is one of a few nations in Eastern Europe not affiliated with the alliance. To this point, questions are raised. Is Russia only looking to free Ukraine from its pro-Western regime, or the main goal to bring back Ukraine, a Russian land such as Crimea in 2014? Is Ukraine interested to join NATO based on strengthening its security or to threaten Russia's national security, as it is claimed? Multiple questions are directed to our panel of guests. We have Mr. Ulf Sandmark, co-founder of the Belt and Road Institute and chairman of the Schiller Institute in Sweden, and Mr. Valentin Yakushik from Kiev, an international relations professor. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us in this debate. The show begins right after this break. And before we delve into our discussion, speaking at a meeting of allied defense ministers to discuss the war in Ukraine and how the best to support Kiev resistance against Russia's invasion, Austin praised Germany's major decision to send 50 anti-aircraft tanks to Ukraine. That was confirmed on Tuesday by German Defense Minister Christian Lambrecht.
We decided yesterday to support Ukraine with Jeopard anti-aircraft systems, which is exactly what Ukraine needs right now to secure its airspace from the ground. This is what became clear again today. Germany is ready, and during today's conference, we will look into all possibilities how we can further support Ukraine in its courageous and important fight for freedom and for peace.
And I wanted to especially welcome a major decision by our German host, as Minister Lambrecht announced just today that Germany will send Ukraine some 50 Cheetah anti-aircraft systems. And yesterday, of course, the British government announced that it would provide Ukraine with additional anti-aircraft capabilities as well. And today, Canada announced that it will send Ukraine 8 armored vehicles.
Mr. Ulf, I will be starting with you. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And how can you describe this sudden military backup from Germans to Ukraine? Isn't a real dangerous move against Russia, taking into consideration that Germany is already suffering from this operation?
Well, it's very dangerous because what we see is a build-up to try to crush Russia with the help of the last Ukrainian. They will fight to the end, but not themselves. This is a policy to destroy Russia economy and policy to be a leading power by using Ukraine as a hand grenade. So this is very, very dangerous, and there should be a peace negotiation immediately. And it was possible already before the war started to have this agreement on non-alignment of Ukraine to NATO. And just one nation of the NATO countries had demanded that the war had been stopped.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Valentin, recently, don't you think that there are so many countries looking forward to help Ukraine? Don't you think that this direct help comes only because there is a sense of Ukraine is winning the war against Russia?
Oh, we are watching not only the war between Russia and Ukraine, when Russian leadership ordered a military attack on Ukraine and destroyed a lot of infrastructures, pushed away millions of Ukrainian citizens. But we also watch the process of developing the world, a special type of a world war between two actors. On one side, there is Russia, whose leaders draw Russian Federation into a geopolitical and civilizational trap. And on another side, there is alliance of dozens of Western nations. Yesterday, we saw the meeting of defense ministers of 40 countries, NATO, EU countries, who formally already created an anti-Russian alliance. So what we see, the fight between two blocs on the territory of Ukraine. And it's not a new invention that two adversaries are fighting on some limited territory. It was similar situation in Korea in the 50s, when in Korea there were American forces and Western forces, and on another side there were Chinese forces and Russian pilots, and Soviet Union was helping the North Korea. And then similar was in Vietnam, when American, Australians, and many other Westerners were there in South Vietnam fighting with the local guerrillas and with Northern Vietnam. And the Soviet Union was, and China were on the side of the Northern Vietnam. Soviets had their pilots who seemingly were not shown as Russian, as Soviet. They pretended to be Vietnamese by their status. So now we are facing similar process when Ukraine is a territory of conflict between two blocs. Definitely it is very dangerous situation for the entire world, when Russian leadership was threatening that at some point there may be even nuclear weapons used.
Understood.
And this is time for real comprehensive negotiations. All conflicts in Korea, in Vietnam, in many other countries, they were finished with some kind of a compromise with the agreement. It should be reached on Ukraine. Ukraine is suffering more than anybody now in the world. Destruction of infrastructures, killing a lot of civilians, emigration, and so on. It is a world crisis which should be resolved by universal decisions.
Mr. Valentin, we will come to this point. Now, moving on to the second point, due to the refusal to pay for gas in rubles, Russian energy giant Gazprom cut off supply to Bulgaria and Poland on Wednesday. It is Russia's most severe retaliation to the West's sanctions over the Ukraine crisis. Gazprom says it hasn't received payment from Poland or Bulgaria since April 1st and has halted delivery as of Wednesday.
Our gas storage are 76% full. This is a high level of filling, much higher than in most European countries. Therefore, also in this transitional period, before the Baltic gas pipeline is launched, we will be able to draw on that our resources, as well as obtain gas from all possible other sources.
Mr. Wolf, except Hungary, the only country that approved to pay Russian gas by rubles, and Russia is cutting off its gas to anyone who refuses to pay as follows. So, how can Europe survive without availability of the Russian gas? Are there any alternatives ready to be used?
Well, there is no real alternative. So what they are doing from the Western side with the sanctions is to shoot themselves in the foot and destroy their own economy. And this is a very dangerous situation because this will create a world crisis. We already see a food crisis. We see energy crisis. We see inflation running rampant. And then there is the financial crisis that is coming down because of this. So we will see a very, very dangerous situation in the economy that has to be fixed. And therefore we need a peace negotiation based on a development policy and a security for all nations. There must be also security for Russia. There must be security for Ukraine. But you cannot demand to have security on the cost of your neighbor. You must have a policy where you find the neighbor to make the best for the neighbor. So the benefit of the other is the way to go to peace. When you have a good neighbor and the good neighbor's economy, then you have a good peace also. So this is the principle where we can come to a peace negotiation. And this was the old Westphalian principle, and this is also in the UN policies, to have security, but together with a development program.
Mr. Ulf, staying with you, don't you think that Germany and Italy are looking forward to find a replacement for Russian gas from the Gulf countries or the Middle East, North Africa countries such as Algeria? Can these countries replace Russian gas?
Well, it's not possible. And at the same time, they have a policy to close down their own nuclear powers and have this green reset policy.
Mr. Valentin, are you hearing me? Okay, moving on to the second point, until we get back to our guests. Russia's defense ministry said on Wednesday its Caliber missiles has struck an arms depot in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region, housing weapons from the United States and European countries. The ministry said its air force had destroyed 59 Ukrainian military targets. Russia has warned the United States that large Western deliveries of weapons to Ukraine are fueling the 9-week-old conflict.
Russia's armed forces continue their special military operation in Ukraine. High-precision, long-range, sea-launched Caliber missiles have destroyed hangars on the ground of Zaporizhzhia aluminum plant supplied to Ukrainian troops by the US and European countries. The Russian Air Force's Tactical and Army Air Division hit 59 Ukrainian military facilities overnight.
Mr. Ulf, as it is clearly seen, Russia now is fighting not only Ukraine, but rather all the NATO countries. The question raised now, is Russia capable to keep moving forward to the plan made?
To decide what they are doing, but there is clearly a danger now from the Western side just to escalate, because there is only one policy, and that is to escalate. Come to an agreement. 40 nations is not that very big. If you look to the world population, it's kind of, they are only some 16%. Most of the world is not agreeing with this sanctions and want to go for a peace policy and a development policy to take care of the food crisis and the health crisis and the energy crisis and the need for a development policy. So this is also where there can be unity to come out of this crisis. But escalation leads to more escalation and more danger. And into world war, and this will be a nuclear war.
Sorry to cut your chain of thought, Mr. Ulf, but It seems that US want this war to continue because it serves their interests by weakening the rival Russia and to improve their influence in Europe via NATO expansion. Since now, even Sweden and Finland are looking to join NATO based on security concerns. What are you saying about this?
Well, this is a discussion going on now, and it's like a coup d'etat in the Swedish society and Finnish societies, because we have had this policy of non-alignment since 200 years. And it's in the tradition of Sweden to be, and Scandinavia, to be a calm corner for development. What we see here in Scandinavia is a nuclear weapons confrontation, because already there were exercises with B-52 bombers coming into Sweden, escorted by Swedish aircraft over Swedish territory, just up to the other side of Sweden, close to the Russian sea territories. These are B-52 can take 12 Tomahawk missiles, so it's a threat of extinction to Russia. And furthermore, if Sweden and Finland joins NATO, there is only 180 kilometers from Finland to Murmansk, to the basis for nuclear weapons carrying submarines. And this is the second strike of the whole balance of power between the West and the East. The whole doctrine is based that there should be a second strike. And these submarines are based in the north. And if these northern bases are threatened, then we have no balance of nuclear weapons. So it's an absolute severe threat that cannot be accepted. It's much worse than, or you can compare it to if Ukraine got nuclear weapons, which was proposed by President Zelensky and almost was the trigger to the whole war in Ukraine. We have a much more dangerous situation with nuclear weapons in Scandinavia, and this is not being discussed here yet, but it is coming up, and the population is more and more mobilizing to stop this NATO
expansion. Mm-hmm.
Expansion.
Quite absolutely. Understood. Mr. Valentin, after more than 2 months from now, since the Russian operation began, how can you read the international relations of the whole world in the meantime and after this operation comes to an end? In other words, could we see a different, newly born alliance between countries?
As to joining to the alliance of the former neutral nations, it is a symbolic, an important symbolic fact, similar to the facts which we saw during the war in Iraq or in Afghanistan, when it was important to have forces, even small forces from small countries, in order to show that this is a world coalition. But in fact, these were wars primarily conducted by the United States, Britain, and their closest allies like Australia. Yeah? In this case, Finland and Sweden are irrelevant for a geopolitical situation. The West is overwhelmingly much stronger than Russia. Russia made a very big mistake. And with the present leadership and with the present ideology and concepts, it cannot be a real opponent to the West. It is not repeating the Soviet situation. So what will be the result of all of that? Very bad result for Ukraine with the destruction, but at the present state. But there may be a positive solution afterwards, like Japan in 1945 lost the war, but was recreated as real great economic power due to what? To democratization, to modernization, and so on. Now I see some features in possible positive solution for Ukraine when British government is saying that it is ready to care about Kiev region, when Sweden says that it's ready to care about one of the southern regions, I forgot which one, Kherson or Nikolaev, it's a very good sign. If any other Western nation will introduce its own economic models, its own anti-corruption models in Ukraine. Ukrainian system has been very corrupt, very inefficient. And in a new post-war Ukraine, we need really democratic, Western, better standards, best standards. So I hope there will be such chance if the West will behave not in a selfish way, but in a responsible way to help to restore Ukrainian social fabrics, Ukrainian infrastructures, Ukrainian economy, and morals, democratic morals in the country, avoiding any extremist solutions. European laws have to be enforced in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Mr. Valentin.
That Russia will have regime change and will also adapt democratic changes, but it will take some time.
One point left to be discussed. Tensions soaring in the pro-Russian Moldovan separatist region of Transnistria abroad in Ukraine after a series of explosions occurred Tuesday at a radio tower. Ukraine responded immediately, accusing Moscow of trying to drag Moldova's breakaway region into its war in Kiev. The president of Moldova, for her part, called for calm and announced measures to strengthen the security in the region.
We are vigilant and we will take all necessary measures to prevent escalation and strengthen the security of our state and the protection of our citizens. We must remain calm. We condemn any provocation and any attempt to lure the public of Moldova into actions that may endanger peace in our country.
We are aware of the explosions that occurred yesterday in Transnistria. We're closely monitoring the situation as we determine what happened. We reiterate the Moldovan government's call for calm in response to these incidents. And we fully support, as you have heard us say before, Moldova's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We respect its constitutionally guaranteed neutrality. We don't know all of the details beyond regarding what transpired yesterday, but we do remain concerned about any potential attempts to escalate tensions.
Mr. Olf, based on these statements and Zelensky's statements, is the Ukrainian president trying to put more political pressure over Russia by pushing the outward concerns of other countries to the scene? I mean, Zelensky is using the sake of other countries to bring more support to his cause.
Well, he is, of course, mobilizing support as much as possible, but the problem is that this kind of support will just increase the tensions and will prolong the war. What should be done from the Western side is to stop this policy of dominating the world. Mr. Price here said that he respects the sovereignty of Transnistria and so on, but this is a lie because he has a doctrine, the Wolfowitz doctrine, since 1992, and it says that the U.S. policy is to stop any country from taking the kind of position like the Soviet Union was that could threaten the hegemony of the Western world. So his policy is to not respect anyone, any country, because the hegemony of the West goes first. And this is what they call the rules-based order. The rules-based order is not any rules at all. It's just a policy of one-sided domination from the Western world, and everyone has to accept their policy. And this is it's just a kind of show from Mr. Price to speak about respect of sovereignty. They don't respect sovereignty in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, and now they are not respecting any kind of rights for Russia or other leading countries to have security. There must be security for all sides. Then you can have security. And this has to come to a negotiation before there is a nuclear war escalation.
Quite understood. Mr. Valentin, based on what Mr. Olf said, is that the security must be shared between Russia and Ukraine, taking into consideration that Ukraine, as it is claimed, they threaten Russia's national security, and that's what pushed Russia to invade Ukraine. What are you saying about these words?
Well, the same things Ukrainian leadership says towards Russian leadership, that Russian leadership threatened Ukrainian security, and now Ukrainian security is at stake. But what is happening now, if there are threats to create second or third front against Russia? Yeah, there are such attempts to invite Georgia to start a war in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Georgia say, no, thank you. We are not going to be involved in that. With Moldova, it's more difficult situation, but there is also a plan to start in Pridnestrovia, in Transnistria, a war. It's logical plan to distract Russian forces from Donbass and from southern Ukraine. Maybe there will something happen soon in Syria, where there are also some remnants of Russian forces there. So it's just military and geopolitical work. But it works now in the interim period while there are military clashes. They may continue for 2-3 weeks while there is a decisive battle in Donbass in the south, Ukraine taking place. It may continue for several months in the worst case scenario, but then at least that it will be necessary to find a compromise based on the correlation of forces. We do not see how it will be, but the war must be stopped. And Ukrainian national interests have been taken in the long term, but also now. If Russia starts its military activities more intensively, they should learn from the previous period that no looting should take place, no destruction of civilian infrastructures. So this is in the short term what we need to demand from Russia. Later, they will have to withdraw forces from Ukraine, and we will find a kind of good compromise for all, for the West and for the East, for Ukraine and for Russia. But now it is time of the battles.
Perfectly understood. Mr. Ulf, Mr. Valentin is saying that the war must stop. Based on what? Can we say in a couple words how can we stop this war?
Well, I agree totally with Mr. Valentin that what we will see is a danger of escalation by bringing in more and more destabilizations in the region into, as he explained, with Georgia, with Transnistria. This is exactly what we are afraid of here in Scandinavia, that the Baltic Sea, which was a sea of peace and low tension for almost a century, must be not the playground for geopolitical forces. That's why the main powers and not has to be kept out of the Baltic Sea. And if NATO is coming into the sea, this to Sweden and Finland, this will be a major playground for British, for American policies, and this is will create a lot of destabilizations, just like we saw in the Middle East or other.
Understood.
What Ukraine looks forward to if it doesn't come to peace soon.
Mr. Ulf Sandmark from Sweden, Mr. Valentin Yakushik from Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us in this debate. It was always a pleasure having you with us. Ladies and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. A special coverage will be held also tomorrow. For now, have a blessed evening.